Hello everyone, thanks for joining us. I'm going to share my screen. Are we talking about BHO, which is, as it says here, a digital library of key sources for the history of the British Isles? This is what I'm planning to cover in the next 15 minutes, if I can get through it all. So first of all, if you've never seen British History Online, this is our homepage. It's a digital library. Most of our content is free, and everything I'm going to show you today is free. We do have a small premium content section as well. And we divide our material into 5 categories: guides and calendars, primary sources, secondary sources, data sets, and maps. And I'm going to show you an example of each of those briefly. Particular areas of strength in terms of history types are local history to the UK, parliamentary history, and the history of the British state. I would say that the sort of centre of gravity in terms of chronology is about 1400 to 1800, but we do have material from everything from the Iron Age through to the immediate present. So it's worth, whatever you're interested in, if it has to do with the British Isles, it's worth having a search on BHO. So I'm going to show you next one of our calendars. Here we are. We have about 500 of these, mostly calendars of state papers. Let me go down a bit so you can see a bit more of the text. So calendars are summaries, they're finding aids for manuscripts in archives, and the key feature of them is that they're organised chronologically. So the archive in question here is the archive of the Cecil papers, which are held in Hatfield House. The Cecil family were advisors to Elizabeth I and James I. Then Lord Burghley here is William Cecil. And so it's a summary of this letter from the Privy Council to Burghley. Tells you when it was written, where, Court of Nonsuch, just outside London, and in July the 6th, 1589. So we've got tons and tons of those. And the idea is that if you're very interested in this letter, you go to Hatfield House and you want to see the original manuscript, of which this is just a summary. And these are great, but it has to be admitted that they are really focusing on the elites of the British state. So I want to show you something newer on BHO, which is a bit of a contrast. So staying in 1589, I'll show you a petition. And this is the petition, as you can see, of Margaret Clark, a spinster living in the village of Highley in Cheshire. In 1589 at the quarter session. So she took her petition to the local court when she could. And what she's alleging here is that she, a live-in servant, was abused, beaten up by her master's son, who also threatened to cut her throat and burn her. She complained to the local constables. The first one pretended not to be at home. The second one actually threatened to beat her up himself. You can read this petition yourself if you want to read the details. And so she's petitioning for redress at the quarter sessions. And so what we have here is the history of a working class woman living in the countryside in the 16th century, which I think is a great contrast to the Cecil papers I've just shown you. Maybe not exactly their own voices in many cases, because they're probably advised by scribes how to word things and so on. But even so, it's very close to that. And we have 7 volumes of these now on BHO. I'm just going to show you something that I like from the introduction to each volume, in this case, the Cheshire Quarter Sessions, which is that our collaborators, our colleagues at Birkbeck and UCL have put in these introductions that they've written, actual petitions, a couple of actual petition photographs to give you a real sense of what it was that was transcribed. So so about 14 of these on BHO as well you can look at. And even if you want to compare the transcription, you can practice your reading of 17th, 18th century handwriting. And talking of transcription, Simon said I would cover this, and I will. This big question of rekeying and OCR, optical character recognition. This is a key distinction when using any online resource, so it's well worth being aware of it. Those manuscripts I just showed you were typed out, transcriptions were typed out by experts in reading those hands, but everything we have on British History Online that's text has been typed out, including mostly what we have, which is books. So we didn't use what most online resources use, which is a computer program, optical character recognition. to translate the pixels from the images into text. And the great thing about OCR is it's cheap and you can do mass digitization that way. So any big resource that you use online will have been done by OCR, by a computer program. Google Books, Simon mentioned already, the 19th century newspapers at the British Library, many others. It's the only way to do it, but the accuracy varies wildly across different types of material and when the OCR was done, because it's got better over the last 20 years. Early OCR is notably worse. Another thing to be aware of is that things like proper names, which are more unusual, especially obscure place names, do very badly in OCR because the OCR program uses dictionaries to try and work out what words are. So there's a favouring of more common words. And that means that you just need, when you do searches, you need to be aware that with OCR material, you're not getting everything that's in there that could be found by a human reader. BHO, though, is completely rekeyed, and we have very high accuracy rates. Sometimes when I'm checking what we get back from our keying companies, I find small mistakes. I check them against the original print volume, and it's nearly always a typo in the original book that has been faithfully transferred over to BHO. So extremely high accuracy is what you can expect on British History Online. But because we're a relatively small resource, that's feasible. Local history, I'm going to show you we have nearly 200 volumes of the Victoria County history. Here, this is the parish of Standish, which is now in Greater Manchester. And just, it's always worth with BHO looking at the dates on the top. This one was published originally in 1911. So obviously it's the history of Standish up to about 1910, and it's not going to have anything from the 20th century. VCH has been going for 120 years, so we have very recent volumes as well on BHO with nice colour photos and things, which obviously have the parish that's being discussed up until that moment, but some of them are much older. And if I just go down, I can show you some. We have things which are still completely relevant today. So this discussion of the church St Wilfrid's in Standish is probably pretty much the church as it is today. I had a look at it on Wikipedia earlier, and I think this is probably excellent information, still very detailed. But if you want the kind of modern history of Standish, you would have to look elsewhere. So let me move on now to subject guides. When I give these talks, I'm aware that I'm throwing lots of information at you, and it's hard to know with BHO how to navigate around. So we have commissioned 5 subject guides about how to use BHO effectively by people who are not only subject experts, like Paul Seawood here is an expert on parliamentary history, but Paul and all the other authors of these know BHO very well. So they go through what you can find on parliamentary history, which we have lots on BHO. And importantly, we did ask each of the authors to talk about strengths and weaknesses, because we want you to use BHO critically. We're certainly not saying it's the one-stop shop for British history. So, but this gives you a good sense of what is there, what's not there, and indeed, as Paul mentions, where else you can go, other sources. So please do use those subject guides. Another new thing we just added this year is a thesis listing. So what we've done is we've published a listing of theses in history awarded in Britain between 1900 and 2014. That's about 20,000 theses. Also some Republic of Ireland theses as well. So I'll just go down a little bit and show you what we have there. And we've exposed, this originally was a database. So we've exposed some of the database terms, which means that you can search, do a plain text search for things that are used as database terms in the vocabulary. So here's an example index term, border officers. So if you're interested in this thesis, then you could do a text search for border officers and hope that other things have been categorized as in the index as border officer. So that's why I've exposed all of that. Now this is nice, but suppose you want to read one of the theses that we've listed here, and you may know that the British Library has a service called Ethos, online thesis service. So we thought, well, what about if we add links automatically from our 20,000 theses to Ethos? Wouldn't that be a great idea? It turned out to be a bit more difficult than we thought, but this is our first attempt just in this page. All these links here are links through to Ethos. You can see we haven't got everything. The one at the top, PhD London, 1988, we couldn't find that in Ethos automatically. And then the one below that is an MPhil, and Ethos only lists PhD doctoral theses, so you wouldn't find that. And anything from, say, Trinity College Dublin would also not be an Ethos because it's UK only. But given that we've got quite a few of them here, and I'm just going to click through and show you. I'm going to look at this one, Cricket, Class and Colonialism. If I open that in a new tab, it should take me through to the thesis on Ethos. Notice that it's slightly differently spelt here. They said in this title it's 2 elites as a number, and back on BHO it's 2 elites as a word. This is one of the problems we have with matching. If we make the matching too fuzzy, we get the wrong thesis, and if we make it not fuzzy enough, we don't get anything. So we've had to try and find a balance. This one goes through, it gives you a nice full summary of what the thesis is about, the abstract written by the author of the thesis. Sometimes Ethos actually has the thesis online and you can download it from there. In this case, it doesn't, but this one at the University of Edinburgh, there's a link straight through to the repository there. And if I follow that, here's the thesis in Edinburgh's Research Archive. And if you click on this, which I did earlier, you can download the PDF of this thesis and read it straight away. So we are planning to add the rest of the pages with links to Ethos through the autumn. If there are things that we don't get automatically, it's still worth searching Ethos, because a more kind of rough search with the author's name and a bit of guesswork about search terms might well find it. Last thing I want to mention before I stop are maps. We have complete set of 19th century Ordnance survey maps. This is where I'm speaking to you from, slightly later in time. I think nearly all these fields are gone, so I'm going to zoom in. I'm in Acton in West London. That's Wormwood Scrubs there. I'm actually slightly south of Wormwood Scrubs here. And if you zoom in, you can zoom and pan, and then it does resolve to better quality. This is pretty much exactly where I am. And what's happened since, you see the nursery there above the road, that's all now made into a park. But the railway line is still there. That's now the overground line at Acton Station is still there. And these arms houses are still there. But all around these fields are all houses now, including one I'm in about here. So it's a nice way to explore what's changed. Just be a little bit careful with the dates. Because obviously this mapping took a long time. This map of Middlesex here took 15 years. So if you want to know exactly when a feature occurs on the map, you'll have to do a bit of detective work working out exactly when this bit of the map should have been mapped, because you have to find a feature which appeared at a certain point in that date range, but it'll give you a good idea. So that's all from me.